Second part. Once a surrender agreement had been reached, the top commanders besieged Greylancer with questions. The brunt of their censure was directed at the fact that Greylancer had killed Merling and concealed his death, and for his daring to go against the War Council's decision and act alone. For the former violation, Merkella explained that Greylancer had been acting on her orders. As for the latter, it was decided that Greylancer would be disciplined pending the Privy Council's deliberation. After enduring the litany of charges against him in silence, Greylancer rose from the table, shot a vicious look that nearly drained blood from the faces of the self-satisfied generals, and exited the chamber. Outside, he caught up with General Benej, a commander in Merling's army, as he was preparing to return to the castle. "Where is Merling's tomb?" Greylancer asked. "Oh, do you wish to lay some flowers?" Greylancer bared his fangs. A true warrior would take no pleasure in such a gesture from the enemy. Then he lowered his voice and said, "There is a matter I wish to look into. He lies in the basement altar of Herr Merling inside the castle." "Very well. I shall be there in an hour's time. I pray the door will be open." Greylancer's eyes glinted with a look of resolve. Page break indicated by a small cross. Never had the burden of war been so light on the attacking army, and never had there been a more dissatisfying end to fighting. As fortunate an outcome a bloodless surrender was, a battle was an opportunity for warriors to win both distinction and reward. Had the castle fallen, they were also free to plunder its spoils. Since time immemorial, it was an unwritten law of war. Yet this engagement had provided no such opportunity. The enemy commander had been defeated before battle, and the surviving generals could do little more than fight back tears and their own bloodlust to honor their master's orders of an unconditional surrender of the castle. Naturally, the generals of the counterinsurgency forces had directed their ire at Greylancer. Plenty of past commanders who'd found themselves in the same circumstance had been assassinated. That Greylancer had not suffered the same fate was a testament to his might. An hour later, Greylancer had set foot inside the catacombs. Aside from the chief steward ushering them inside, the noble brought with him only one companion. Not a soldier, but a protégé he'd taken under his wing. Moonlight shone down upon the spacious floor, the stone cobbled walls, and extravagant coffins each taking up space in numerous depressions in the walls. The moon, stars, and sky above were all holographic projections. Greylancer asked the steward leading the way, "Would you say your master was a vain man?" "Gracious, no." The blonde-haired steward shook his head. "Lord Merling never expressed interest in worldly acquisitions. If by chance you were referring to the coffin, his lordship was merely honoring the wishes of his father." "So it was his old man who was vain." Greylancer tapped one of the coffins with his silver lamps. "Because they were blessed with agelessness, few nobles ever died. Though ancestral coffins lined the catacombs after the burial methods of human noble houses, the coffins were nothing more than decoration, holding not a single corpse." That Greylancer felt compelled to ask after Merling's vanity spoke to just how many nobles were given to such an unnecessary practice. "This way," said the steward at last, a bit crossly, after escorting Greylancer and his companion in silence. Stopping, he gestured toward the door ahead. The tomb of the last head of Herr Merling. When Greylancer opened the door, a cavernous chamber more spacious than the last spread before him. This is no illusion, thought the noble. In the center of the marble floor, roughly 200 meters ahead, lay a coffin atop a bronze altar, encircled by 4 candle stands. Orange-colored flames danced in the reflection of the surface of the coffin. There was a scar where Greylancer's lance had pierced the lid. "I can go no further," said the steward. "When your business is done, please see yourselves out." Leaving the escort at the door, Greylancer and his retainer passed through the doors of the chamber. The noble took about 50 strides toward the altar and stopped. Blue shadows descended from the ceiling, intercepting Greylancer's advance. 4 men and 2 women dressed like farmers. Given how they had swooped down from a ceiling beam 100 meters high, they were not human. Half humans. Greylancer's eyes burned crimson. "Who alerted you to my coming?" Their answer was an all-out attack. The 4 men attacked with swords, while the 2 women took aim with stake guns. The half-humans had chosen not to open with a projectile attack, knowing Greylancer's lance was fast enough to strike down their bullets. They held back, waiting for an opening, as the 4 men charged headlong into what would certainly be their death. One half-human woman aimed for Greylancer's companion, standing next to his master. But the gunpowder in the flashpan of the companion's flintlock rifle ignited first. A report from the woman's gun followed, sending a stake whizzing toward the target at 500 meters per second. If neither could evade the other's bullet, they would both surely be hit. Neither shooter had time to react. The gunner's bullet hit the stake in midair and shattered it. In the next instant, the gunner drew the flintlock gun from his waist and drilled a bullet between the woman's eyes. The woman's head was thrown backward as she fell on her back, smoke smoldering from the bullet hole dead center. The second woman aimed at the gunner next. The sharpshooter dove to the ground and rolled several times even as he took aim with a 4-barreled pepper box. A more developed weapon than the flintlock, this gun had a percussion cap. The hammer ignited a charge. When the gun fired, however, the woman had already taken cover. The bullet missed her by meters. Meanwhile, Greylancer, casually parrying the 4 swords arrayed against him, beheaded 2 of the men with a single swing of his lance. The third man had leapt over the sideways swing of the lance and threatened to strike down Greylancer from above, while the 4th had ducked and now skittered on his knees toward the noble. Neither had expected the lance to reverse course. Rather than continuing its sideways trajectory, the lance sprang back in the opposite direction and skewered the half-human bearing down overhead and plunged into the 4th man's back, pinning him against the floor. Greylancer fixed an amused look on the man thrashing and screeching like an insect on the ground, and called out, "Gallagher! I've disposed of the rest." The gunner finished reloading his gun and rifle and rose from his knee. This man, giving Greylancer a curt nod, was none other than the gunner whom Greylancer had captured after foiling his attempt to assassinate Merling only several days ago. But these are not half-humans. The half-human attackers, save the barrel-chested man skewered by Greylancer's lance, had melted into puddles of glowing pale blue ooze. After giving up their human hosts, the OSB had returned to their original forms. I detected no one, much less the likes of you following us. You must have been waiting here for us. Greylancer twisted the lance. The OSB, still keeping the form of the barrel-chested man, writhed in agony. Answer. Who told you of our coming, and why do you wish us dead? The man did not answer. The noble gave his lance another twist. "Beats me," the man finally sputtered. "The boss told us to ambush you here, is all." He answered in the rustic manner of a farmer, and the OSB always borrowed the memories and thus the language of the beings it possessed. "I detected no one, much less the likes of you following us. You must have been waiting for us here." Greylancer twisted the lance. The OSB, still keeping the form of the barrel-chested man, writhed in agony. "Who is this boss you speak of?" Silence. Greylancer twisted the lance, and then a scream. "Rafa." "I don't know." So unbearable was his pain that the OSB had forgotten its adopted memories, its words no longer of this world. Its screams, too, ceased to sound human. "Do you continue to twist and plunge a lance into the victim's stomach to divine the truth, dear Greylancer?" The noble smoldered with a look of rapture, relishing the sight of the man struggling to swallow its last breaths. "That's quite enough." Greylancer whirled in the direction of the voice. He had not sensed the arrival of a new presence. Gallagher remained down on one knee, and jerked his rifle up to his shoulder, shaken. "What brings you here, Chancellor Cornelius?" Greylancer asked coolly. The figure in white robes and dark gown standing before him was indeed the bearer of that name. Since the councillors had not taken part in the counterinsurgency, the Chancellor's presence confirmed Greylancer's suspicions. "So you are behind this intrigue?" "Sadly, no. There is another," answered the old Chancellor as he untied the strings of his gown. "My part is to drive the stake that will send you to your death. I had not considered that you were capable of manipulating the OSB. I must ask, what ties do you have with the invaders?" "The nobility's defeat is inevitable," said Chancellor Cornelius, stone-faced. "Odd." Greylancer arched a brow. "It is true that their science is superior to ours. However, we are in possession of a more fundamental and decisive advantage. We possess eternal life." "Provided that a stake is not driven into our hearts," added Chancellor Cornelius. His voice spread over the chamber like a curse. "But we are also hampered by what you call a fundamental and decisive disadvantage, which the Privy Council and Ultimate Mind have pointed out will lead to our eventual downfall for hundreds of years. The degeneration of the noble race." A certain sound reverberated inside Greylancer's mind, an indescribable yet certain echo of destruction. On the second day of the war against the OSB, the Ultimate Mind prophesied our defeat. That is to say, our degeneration will be the cause of our fall 3,000 years from now. Those are the words of the sacred ancestor himself, Lord Greylancer. During the dawn of the noble civilization, with which Greylancer was unfamiliar, the sacred ancestor had vanished, leaving behind an enormous computer to advise the noble leaders in his place. Kept inside the inner chamber of the Privy Council Ministry, this Ultimate Mind continued to bestow the nobility with the words of the sacred ancestor to this day. Greylancer sighted a grey swirl churning before his very eyes, a chaotic vortex that threatened to swallow the hollow wills of all mortal creatures, great and small. Nay, even the wills of the immortal. The decision handed down by the sacred ancestor cannot be overturned, the Chancellor continued. So we contacted the OSB through back channels and initiated negotiations. The aliens proclaimed that their interstellar conquest was the will of their deity. that this conflict was about shedding a ray of civilization onto the ignorant masses whom understood nothing of their will. It was for this reason the OSB rejected our offer of truce, and so the war continued. But 5 days ago, a faction occupying a stronghold vital to the OSB conquest secretly declared their willingness to negotiate a ceasefire. We reached a tentative peace agreement on the same day, one in which this planet will come under OSB rule. That's absurd. The warrior's cry thundered across the corners of the chamber. Exactly right. The ultimate mind had predicted that you would utter those very words, as well as another. Mayorling. Of course, Mayorling knew nothing of our negotiations with the OSB. He had gotten wind of the plasma attack to exterminate the OSB enclaves, and of the demand that the frontier will be made to submit to the Privy Council's control. Had he learned the truth, Mayorling would no doubt have said and acted in much the way you have. In that sense, his subjugation in accordance with the central government's decision was a stroke of good fortune. And now, Lord Greylancer, you will follow him in death. No sooner had he said the word death than Chancellor Cornelius's head detached from his body and shot up in the air. Kicking off the ground, the rest of his body followed. Greylancer took aim and plunged his lance past the old man's flowing robes and into his headless body.